In the 1970s, while the world was divided between Cold War tensions and technological advances, something strange began to happen in the remote countryside of South America. Farmers woke up to scenes that defied logic. Their livestock lay dead, but the bodies followed no known pattern of predation. There was no blood on the ground, no signs of struggle. The incisions looked like they had been made with high-precision surgical tools, as if the animals had undergone procedures in an operating room. Tongues removed, internal organs missing, and all of it happened overnight. No one saw or heard a thing, just silence, and the unsettling feeling that something inhuman had passed through. The first authorities to arrive tried to find rational explanations. Wild animals? Occult rituals? Smugglers? But nothing made sense. None of the known predators in the region, jaguars, vultures, or even scavengers, were capable of producing such clean cuts or removing organs without damaging surrounding tissue. Investigations hit a dead end. There were victims, but no clues. Veterinarians examining the remains were baffled. Some recorded a total absence of blood, as if it had evaporated. Others noted burn marks on the tissue with cauterized edges, impossible to produce with any rudimentary tool. Slowly, the reports stopped being isolated. Similar cases started emerging in different South American countries: Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, and especially Brazil. The pattern was consistent: nocturnal mutilations, absolute silence, and wounds that defied the medical and technological capabilities of the time. Local newspapers began to cover the incidents, though often with skepticism. For the press, these were just rural tales, folklore with no foundation. But the farmers knew what they saw, and fear began to spread among the communities that depended on livestock to survive. Something was hunting at night, something that left no trace and seemed to choose its victims. The phenomenon soon earned a nickname among the superstitious: the Phantom Cutter. Some believed it was witchcraft or the work of supernatural forces. Others began linking the attacks to strange lights in the sky, objects that moved erratically, without sound, and vanished at high speed. Witnesses reported beams of light descending onto isolated fields, followed by sudden flashes, then total silence. No one ever captured a clear image. No official statements were released. But rumors gained weight as mutilations increased, and the stories, once dismissed as fantasy, began coming from more credible sources. Ufologists soon stepped in. Independent investigators began gathering data directly from the farmers, avoiding interference from media or government officials. Many of the mutilations followed the same technical pattern: no blood clots, cauterized incisions, selective removal of organs like eyes and genitals. For some experts, these signs pointed to medical technologies that simply didn't exist in South America at the time. The hypothesis of extraterrestrial involvement, once completely dismissed, started to be taken seriously. After all, what else could carry out such clean, silent, and complex procedures? But what had been, until then, a rural mystery restricted to animals, was about to evolve. In a small island town in the north of Brazil, something new occurred. The lights stopped targeting cattle. They began targeting people. It was in Colares that fear took on a new shape. Because for the first time, humans were no longer just witnesses to the attacks. They became the victims. And there, in the heart of the Amazon, the unknown stopped being rumor. It became a real, physical threat. The era of mutilations had evolved into a silent war. In the quiet fishing village of Colares, located off the coast of northern Brazil, fear came not from the ground, but from the sky. At first, it seemed like a strange anomaly, something nobody could explain. At night, beams of light began descending, shining down on the residents without warning. These weren't ordinary lights. They moved in a pattern that suggested intent. Some people described them as floating orbs, while others said they looked like sharp, focused rays. Whatever they weren't friendly. The lights seemed to search, hover, and then strike. No one could escape their reach. And those who were hit felt something beyond terror, a sense of their very life being drained away, as if they were being sucked dry by an invisible force. The first victims were mostly fishermen, who would notice these mysterious lights lingering over the waters late at night. At first, they thought it was a passing phenomenon, something that would fade with time. But then, one by one, they began to feel weaker, and some even collapsed from exhaustion. A few noticed strange marks on their bodies, burns that had no apparent cause. And those who had seen the lights from a distance were now describing a terrifying sensation of their energy being drained. The sensation wasn't just psychological. It felt deeply physical, as if their life force was being siphoned away, leaving them limp and disoriented. As the attacks continued, people began to avoid the night altogether. The once thriving community of Colares was being consumed by fear. Dr. Wellade Carvalho, a young physician just out of medical school, was thrust into the center of the growing medical mystery. She had seen plenty of strange cases before, but this was different. One after another, patients arrived at her clinic, all showing the same symptoms: circular burns, strange puncture-like marks, and an inexplicable anemia. What troubled her most was the lack of any blood loss. The wounds appeared, but there was no trace of bleeding. There was no infection, no logical cause for the symptoms. The people who came to her were pale, weak, and terrified. They spoke of a presence, something invisible, that drained them of energy. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was as though they were losing part of themselves. Dr. Carvalho was helpless. There was no medical explanation for what she was witnessing. And the more patients she saw, the more terrified she became. The locals, gripped by panic, began to call it chupa chupa, which translates roughly to the sucker. But this was no folklore. It wasn't a myth passed down through generations. This was happening. Fishermen, farmers, even children began to share similar stories. People were attacked while walking along the beach, while working in their fields, or even while sitting outside at night. It seemed no one was safe. Entire families began to huddle together, sitting around large fires, hoping the flames would keep the lights away. But the lights were relentless. They came regardless of the fire, hovering just out of reach, then descending when the flames were too weak. It was clear that the lights were not afraid of fire, they were drawn to it. And as the nights passed, the fear in Colares grew stronger, and the sense of helplessness took over. Those who had been attacked began to describe strange sensations. They felt paralyzed, unable to move or scream as the lights focused on them. Many spoke of an intense pressure around their chest, as if the air itself was being sucked out of them. Others recalled waking up disoriented, with no memory of what had happened during the attack. It was as though they had lost time, and in some cases, their physical health seemed to worsen without explanation. Some victims reported strange, small puncture wounds that seemed to disappear overnight, leaving only the lingering sensation of weakness. The psychological effects were equally disturbing. People began to develop an overwhelming sense of dread, as though they were always being watched. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was an ongoing crisis that threatened to consume the entire island. With the terror escalating, the people of Colares turned to local authorities for help. But the response was far from reassuring. Local police had no answers. Doctors were at a loss. So, people began to look outside the island for answers. The Brazilian government was eventually informed, and they sent a small team of experts to investigate. By then, the lights had already become a major public concern. News spread beyond the island, and soon, the phenomenon was making headlines across the country. However, most mainstream news outlets dismissed the reports as superstition, attributing them to mass hysteria. The official stance was one of indifference, but the situation on the ground was growing dire. People were afraid to leave their homes at night, and the fear was spreading like wildfire. Something was happening in Colares, and it was only a matter of time before the government would be forced to act. As the attacks continued and the mystery deepened, the Brazilian Air Force became involved in the investigation. Military personnel were deployed to the island, and soon, the situation took a darker turn. These were no longer isolated events. Something had to be done. The first signs of official intervention appeared, but they raised more questions than answers. The military was not there to reassure the public. They were there to investigate the lights, and they had their own reasons for doing so. As the lights became more aggressive, the question was no longer whether the phenomenon was real, it was about what exactly was happening and how much of it the government was willing to reveal. Colares had become a hotbed of fear, mystery, and tension, and the island's dark secret was just beginning to unfold. As the strange lights continued to appear over Colares, the island's once peaceful atmosphere was replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The entire population seemed to be under siege, with reports of mysterious encounters flooding in. The lights, which appeared to come from above, would hover in the sky, often darting quickly in unpredictable directions, much to the terror of anyone who saw them. Soon, it wasn't just the fear of being attacked by the lights but the fear of the unknown that gripped the islanders. People began taking extreme measures to protect themselves, lighting bonfires along the beaches, setting off fireworks into the sky, and creating makeshift barricades to shield themselves. However, no matter what they did, the lights always returned, undeterred, as if mocking their efforts. The community's daily life was entirely disrupted. Families would stay inside at night, their windows tightly shut, and the constant fear of becoming a target made many anxious and on edge. Children were kept indoors, their parents desperately trying to shield them from the terror that lurked above. The lights were not only feared but seemed to drain the life force of those they targeted. People reported feeling unusually weak, as if their energy had been sapped, often experiencing strange physical symptoms like severe fatigue, headaches, and unexplained burns on their bodies. The medical community had no answers, and the local authorities were helpless in the face of the growing hysteria. As the terror mounted, the island's two most shocking deaths would occur, deepening the mystery and paranoia. The first victim was a fisherman found dead in a field, his body showing no signs of trauma, but with strange, burn-like marks on his skin. The second was a woman found dead in her home, under eerily similar circumstances. Both deaths were officially listed as unexplained, but to the residents of Colares, the connection to the mysterious lights was undeniable. These deaths seemed to confirm their worst fears, that the lights were not just draining their energy, but could be fatal. The community was now living in constant terror, with no one safe from the strange forces that hovered above. Despite their best efforts, the residents' fears only grew, and the panic became widespread. People began to distrust each other, some whispering that their neighbors were hiding secrets or even participating in the strange events. Rumors spread quickly, with some believing the lights were part of a government experiment gone awry, while others feared that extraterrestrial beings were behind the phenomenon. No one knew for sure, but the uncertainty only fueled the growing paranoia. Was this a natural occurrence, or was it something orchestrated by powerful forces that wanted to keep it hidden? The mystery surrounding the lights became as terrifying as the lights themselves, and the islanders felt more alone than ever before. The situation was further complicated by the isolation of Colares. As the lights grew more frequent, people avoided traveling to and from the island. The local economy, which had once thrived on fishing and agriculture, began to falter as residents stayed indoors. The island's small community was slowly unraveling under the weight of the fear. Those who had once been neighbors now kept their distance, unable to trust even those they had known their whole lives. It wasn't just the threat of the lights anymore. It was the breakdown of their society and the unraveling of the community fabric that kept people in constant fear. The unknown had taken over their lives in every way. The final nail in the coffin for many was the lack of support from the Brazilian government. Despite the increasing number of reports and the growing panic, there was no official explanation or intervention. The government dismissed the entire situation, claiming that the lights were nothing more than weather balloons or other natural phenomena. But the residents of Colares weren't convinced. The government's refusal to acknowledge the reality of what they were experiencing only fueled suspicions of a larger cover-up. Why weren't they being helped? Was there something more sinister at play? These questions echoed through the island, unanswered, as the fear and uncertainty continued to grow. As the situation on Colares grew increasingly desperate, the Brazilian government could no longer ignore the widespread panic and bizarre events that were unfolding. In response to the growing fear and the deaths that had occurred, the Brazilian Air Force took a dramatic step. They intervened. In 1977, under the command of Captain Hollanda, the military launched a covert operation, codenamed Operation Prato, Operation Plate, with the goal of investigating the strange occurrences plaguing the island. The mission was officially tasked with determining the nature of the mysterious lights and bringing an end to the public hysteria, but the real purpose, according to some, may have been far more complex. Captain Hollanda, a seasoned military officer with experience in aerial reconnaissance, was chosen to lead the operation. A team of elite soldiers, scientists, and investigators was assembled, bringing with them high-tech equipment and the latest in military technology. They landed on Colares with the hope of debunking the UFO sightings and restoring order. However, what they found was nothing like what they had expected. The lights were real, and far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. For Hollanda and his team, the operation quickly transformed from a routine investigation into a fight for survival. The military personnel were immediately faced with an unsettling reality. The lights weren't just strange phenomena, they were behaving intelligently. They didn't merely appear in the sky at random, they seemed to be responding to the investigators. The lights would dart around, shifting direction erratically, and sometimes they would move in such a way that defied the laws of physics. They appeared to be aware of the presence of the soldiers, as if actively observing them. Despite their best efforts to capture clear footage, the investigators were thwarted at every turn. Their cameras malfunctioned, their equipment failed, and their attempts to follow the lights were often met with complete failure. It was as if an invisible force was deliberately interfering with their efforts. The lights themselves were not just eerie and unsettling, they seemed to have a direct effect on the physical environment. During several encounters, the lights would hover near military personnel or their equipment, causing strange disruptions. In one instance, an investigator's wristwatch stopped working the moment he stepped into the presence of one of the lights. Other pieces of electronic equipment would go haywire, often malfunctioning for no apparent reason. Some even reported feelings of intense dizziness and nausea when near the lights, suggesting that there was some sort of unseen force at play, something beyond the capabilities of modern science to explain. The more the military tried to investigate, the more elusive the lights became. The lights weren't just a series of random phenomena, they seemed to follow a pattern, appearing at specific times and places. And they were not alone. Strange aerial maneuvers and even a few close encounters were reported. There were even instances where the lights would dive into the ocean and resurface moments later, only to be seen again hovering over the dense jungle. The military personnel were at a loss for how to react to this behavior. They had trained for combat situations, for war and conflict, but this was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. What they were dealing with was not a traditional enemy, but something far more mysterious and inexplicable. Despite their best efforts, the operation seemed to be producing more questions than answers. As the weeks went on, the number of strange occurrences increased and the military's equipment and technology continued to fail. It became clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. In addition to the technical failures, there were other strange reports, including cases of soldiers suffering from psychological stress and disorientation. Many began to wonder if there was something far more sinister behind the lights. Were they simply natural phenomena, or was there an intelligence behind them, one that the military was ill-equipped to handle? The more the soldiers delved into the mystery, the more their lives and their sense of reality seemed to unravel. After several months, the Brazilian military abruptly pulled the operation to a halt. Officially, the mission was deemed a failure, with no concrete findings to present. The materials that had been gathered, the thousands of pages of reports, hundreds of photographs, and hours of video footage, were classified and locked away. Some reports were even destroyed, and much of the information gathered during the operation would never see the light of day. While the public was left in the dark, whispers of what had truly been discovered began to circulate, with many believing that the military had uncovered something so extraordinary, it had to be kept hidden. What had they learned that was too dangerous to share? The lights over Colares were not merely strange phenomena, they were far more complex and unsettling. As Operation Prato unfolded, it became evident that these lights were not just random flashes or natural occurrences. The investigators soon realized that these lights were exhibiting behavior that suggested intelligence. They weren't just drifting aimlessly in the sky, they seemed to respond directly to the presence of the military personnel. Whenever soldiers attempted to track or approach the lights, they would change direction, sometimes moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. What was even more bizarre was that the lights seemed to be aware of the investigators' movements. Witnesses reported seeing the lights follow their every move, as if the lights themselves were observing the soldiers. Some lights would hover silently in the sky, while others would dart unpredictably in sharp angles, disappearing into the horizon and reappearing moments later in an entirely different location. Despite the use of advanced military tracking equipment, the lights seemed to anticipate every move the soldiers made, staying just beyond reach, never allowing themselves to be fully captured on camera. The lights weren't only behaving in ways that defied human understanding, they also seemed to display an almost uncanny ability to perform impossible aerial maneuvers. In one instance, a light was reported to perform an abrupt right-angle turn at a speed that no known aircraft could achieve. Another light was seen to dive into the ocean, disappearing beneath the water's surface, only to reappear moments later in the dense jungle. This kind of behavior went far beyond anything that could be explained by conventional aviation technology or natural phenomena. To the soldiers and scientists present, these maneuvers suggested a level of technology and intelligence that was, at the very least, extraterrestrial in nature. As the operation continued, the intensity of the encounters grew. The lights began to appear with greater frequency, sometimes in the same locations, other times appearing completely at random. Their patterns were impossible to predict, but they seemed to intensify whenever military personnel were nearby. One of the most unsettling aspects of these encounters was that the lights appeared to be aware of the military's efforts to track them. No matter how much technology was employed, the lights would disappear just as quickly as they had appeared, as if toying with the investigators. The frustration among the soldiers grew, as they could never seem to get close enough to capture definitive evidence of what they were witnessing. Despite the failures to capture clear footage, the investigation was not without results. Several photographs were taken, and there were reports of strange electromagnetic interference that affected the investigators' equipment. Radio signals were disrupted, and military communication devices malfunctioned during encounters with the lights. The inability of the soldiers to document these occurrences in a definitive way only added to the mystery surrounding the lights. If the lights were simply natural phenomena or man-made objects, why were they able to elude all efforts to study them? What made them so elusive that not even the most advanced military technology could capture their true nature? The mystery deepened as the soldiers began to report unusual physical and psychological effects after encountering the lights. Some soldiers claimed to experience dizziness, disorientation, and a sense of nausea when they were near the lights. Others reported feeling an overwhelming sense of unease, as though the lights were not just a physical phenomenon but something that affected the mind and body in profound ways. Some theorized that the lights were emitting some kind of radiation or energy that had a direct physiological effect on the human body. Others wondered if the lights were capable of influencing the mind, inducing a sense of fear or dread in those who came into contact with them. With no clear answers emerging from the operation, the Brazilian military was forced to scale back its efforts. The lights remained a mystery, their origins unknown and their behavior impossible to explain. As Operation Prato wound down, the strange phenomenon was left unresolved, and much of the evidence collected was sealed away in classified archives. The few people who had witnessed the lights firsthand were left to grapple with the terrifying reality of what they had seen, while the rest of the world remained blissfully unaware of the strange and unexplained events that had taken place in the skies over Colares. When the military mission was concluded, the Brazilian government quickly moved to suppress any public discussion about the strange events in Colares. Officially, the military claimed that the mysterious lights were simply the result of meteorological balloons or other easily dismissed explanations. This response, however, was met with skepticism by both the public and the scientists involved in Operation Prato. The official narrative didn't match the accounts of those who had witnessed the lights and the incredible maneuvers they performed. Many felt that the government was hiding something far more significant than they were letting on. What raised even more suspicion was the name of the operation itself, Operation Prato, or Operation Saucer. The name seemed to be a direct reference to UFOs, yet the Brazilian government refused to acknowledge any connection to extraterrestrial phenomena. The irony was not lost on the public or on the investigators involved. Why choose such a specific and suggestive name for an operation if the intention was to debunk UFO sightings? Some believed that the Brazilian military was trying to downplay the significance of what had happened in Colares while simultaneously keeping the operation's true purpose under wraps. As time passed, rumors began to circulate suggesting that the events in Colares were not just an isolated phenomenon but part of a much larger, more sinister global operation. Some researchers pointed to the possibility that the strange lights were connected to secret military experiments, possibly linked to the US government's interests in the region. Conspiracy theories began to surface, alleging that the United States had been conducting clandestine operations in South America, including testing new technologies and weaponry on unsuspecting civilians. The presence of American military personnel in Brazil at the time added fuel to the fire, though no concrete evidence was ever produced to prove these claims. One of the most compelling theories was that the strange lights over Colares were not of extraterrestrial origin at all, but rather the result of covert military experiments. Some researchers speculated that the lights were, in fact, advanced drones or aircraft being tested by the US military in the region. The remote and sparsely populated nature of Colares made it an ideal testing ground for such technologies, as it provided a controlled environment where the military could observe and experiment without attracting too much attention. If these lights were, in fact, man-made, it would explain their erratic behavior and to the apparent inability of the military to track them effectively. Other theories suggested that the phenomenon was related to Operation Condor, a covert campaign involving several South American countries and the United States, aimed at suppressing political dissent during the Cold War. Some believed that the strange lights over Colares were connected to the operations of these secretive intelligence agencies, with the lights possibly being part of a psychological operation designed to intimidate and destabilize local populations. If this was the case, the Brazilian government's dismissal of the UFO phenomenon could be seen as an effort to conceal the true nature of the events and prevent the public from learning about the covert activities of foreign powers in their country. Despite the persistence of these theories, no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced to prove the connection between the lights over Colares and any secret military operations. The Brazilian government continues to maintain that the lights were simply an unexplained phenomenon, unrelated to any military activities. However, the secrecy surrounding the operation and the refusal to release the full extent of the evidence collected during the mission has only deepened suspicions. What, exactly, were the Brazilian military and the US government trying to hide? The truth, it seems, remains locked away in classified files and may never be fully revealed to the public. When Operation Prato was officially brought to a close, Captain Hollanda, the leader of the mission, abruptly disappeared from the public eye. For almost 2 decades, Hollanda remained silent about the events that transpired in Colares. During this time, the Brazilian government and the military continued to dismiss the incident, offering no further explanations or investigations. Yet, despite the official stance, those who had been part of the operation, as well as independent researchers, knew that something extraordinary had happened, something that could not simply be ignored or erased from history. It wasn't until the 1990s that Captain Hollanda began to speak out. In a series of interviews, he revealed details about his experiences in Colares that contradicted the official narrative. He confirmed that the lights he and his team had witnessed were unlike anything they had ever encountered before. He described them as intelligent and capable of performing maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. According to Hollanda, the lights not only observed the military personnel but actively seemed to interact with them, responding to their movements and actions. This was information that had remained sealed for years, and the revelation sent shockwaves through both the public and the scientific community. However, Hollanda's decision to speak out would come at a tragic cost. In 1997, just a few months after revealing his findings, Captain Hollanda was found dead in his home. The cause of death was officially ruled as suicide. He had allegedly hanged himself using his own belt. Yet, the circumstances surrounding his death raised more questions than answers. Many who knew him, including colleagues from the military and investigators who had worked alongside him, believed that his death was far from straightforward. The timing of his death, so soon after he began to speak openly about the events in Colares, only deepened suspicions that something darker was at play. Conspiracy theories surrounding Hollanda's death quickly gained traction. Some believed that he had been silenced in order to prevent him from revealing classified information about what he had seen during the operation. Given the sensitive nature of the investigation and the potential connections to covert military activities, it wasn't difficult for people to imagine that Hollanda's death was not a suicide, but a deliberate act to ensure that certain secrets remained hidden. The idea that Hollanda knew too much, and that someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep him quiet, fueled the speculation surrounding his untimely end. What made the situation even more mysterious was the fact that Hollanda had become a vocal critic of the Brazilian government's handling of the Colares incident. In his final interviews, he expressed anger and frustration at the way the military had downplayed the events and denied the reality of the phenomenon. He believed that the government had knowingly covered up the truth and that the public had been kept in the dark for decades. Hollanda's decision to speak out and expose the hidden truths of Operation Prato was a courageous act, but it may have also made him a target for those who wanted to protect their secrets at any cost. As the years have passed, the mystery surrounding Hollanda's death continues to linger. Was it truly suicide, or was it a carefully orchestrated cover-up? The truth remains elusive, and the unanswered questions surrounding his death add another layer to the already enigmatic history of Operation Prato. Captain Hollanda may have been one of the few who knew the full extent of the events in Colares, but in the end, it seems that some truths are too dangerous to reveal, and some people too dangerous to allow to speak. The mystery of the lights in Colares and the events surrounding Operation Prato continue to haunt Brazil's history, leaving questions that remain unanswered to this day. Was there a secret military experiment happening in the Amazon, or was Colares truly the site of extraterrestrial encounters? The testimonies of those who witnessed the strange lights, the experiences of the victims, and the death of Captain Hollanda suggest that there is much more to this story than the official reports ever revealed. Could some secrets, buried under layers of denial and government silence, be too dangerous to surface? The strange and inexplicable nature of the Colares phenomenon makes us question what really happened on that small island in the 1970s. What were those lights? And why did they target the people of Colares? Could it have been a military experiment, an unknown technology, or something far beyond our understanding? As new generations investigate the case, the story of Colares serves as a reminder that the world still holds mysteries that challenge everything we think we know. The truth may be out there, but it is hidden behind a veil of secrecy, and perhaps some questions are better left unanswered. So, what do you believe? Is there a connection between the strange lights of Colares and the secret military operations that followed? Or are we facing something much more extraordinary, something beyond human comprehension? Only time will tell if the full story of Operation Prato and Colares will ever be fully revealed. If you found this mystery intriguing and want to learn more about other inexplicable cases and hidden theories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. Share this video with your friends and let us know, what do you think really happened in Colares? Leave your comment and share your thoughts. The enigma continues, and we're just getting started.